All right, you are now tuned into the Rotated Views podcast. I am your host, Jimmylee Velez. I'm here with Gabe, Heck, Goose, and James, The Way Home Part 2. In this episode, we have special guest James Richardson. We cover topics that range from running a nonprofit, rental properties, compassion, homelessness, and much more. We wrap the episode up with quotes from the Dalai Lama and Steve Maraboli. Guys, if you're new, thank you for joining us. Don't forget to download and subscribe. We drop a new episode every Tuesday morning for your listening pleasure. Kicking things off, gentlemen, we are 6 years in.
Yeah.
How fantastic is that? Super excited and somewhat of an anniversary because, 6 years in, here we have James Richardson here who was featured with us in episode 167. I believe it was 2020 or 2019, somewhere around there. It's been a year or two, right?
Something like that. Absolutely.
So James, man, thank you for joining us. We appreciate
good to be back.
Absolutely. All right, so if you haven't listened to the first episode 167, please check that out. We have a YouTube channel that's up and running, or should be up and running. Check us out, The Rotated Views. And it will actually have all of our previous show, mainly would be audio, but the last 10 episodes or so will have the visual component.
Yes.
We have our camera here, and so we're capturing James' beautiful face. But for those of us who do not know who you are and what you do, let us know.
Sure. Yeah. So my name's James Richardson, as you said before.
Yep.
I am the president of The Way Home. And I have been serving in that role for the last 10 years. Bristol Borough resident here with my awesome family, and really excited to be here and share with you guys today.
Nice.
I love it. All right, so most of the beginning part was addressed in the first episode, but let's just start really quick. Doesn't have to go into super detail, but how did you get started with The Way Home or in this industry, and what made you want to get started?
Yeah, so my story is a pretty good one.
Yeah.
And so, everybody definitely listen back to that previous episode 167.
Yeah.
But the Reader's Digest version of that is in 2007, I was actually a homeless drug addict.
Yeah.
And had hit rock bottom and clawed my way back from that. And I wound up a resident here in Bristol Borough just a couple of years later, 2009. I was working in 2011 for a local nonprofit, Interfaith Housing. They had a meeting to decide what to do about a homeless camp in Bristol Borough that was being evicted. And I happened to be present for that meeting. And somehow at the end of it, I was chosen to be part of an administrative group to figure out a program for these guys that were homeless and looking for a place to go. And fast forward to the next year in 2012, The Way Home became a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We opened our first lease here in Bristol Borough, and we moved 5 guys into housing. And my passion for it was just that they could be me. Their story could be my story because I came from the same roots. I came from the streets. I came from homelessness. I came from addiction. And my life had been turned around at that point. I just really wanted to give back to people who were struggling like I had been.
Wow. So you mentioned rock bottom, right? And a lot of folks stay there or just don't know how to get out. So if you could share any insight or and any thoughts on how, if you can reflect back, how did you make it out, so to speak, and get out from that, from rock bottom to where you are? Yeah,
so a big piece of that is how I got there in the first place. And so I'm a veteran. I'm a combat vet. I was in Iraq in 2003. I was actually part of the first convoy in.
Thank you for your service.
You're welcome. And I don't regret my service in any way, but we all came home with something we didn't leave with, depended on what that was. And for me, I had something unknown wrong with me. There was something inside that wasn't right, and I didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
I know to this day now that it was PTSD, but it wasn't diagnosed then. And I just ran. And so a good friend of mine from back home in New York had found out about what I was going through, the struggles I was going through, and he reached out. And he didn't stop reaching out.
Wow.
And so, one of the big components there, it was a good question, of, why do some people make it out and why do some others not? And really it comes down to support. And so for me, it was remembering that there were people that loved me, that saw beyond my circumstances in that moment, that saw what I used to be and what I could be again. And that one particular gentleman actually went on to be the best man in my wedding. And
wow,
he's a pastor now, and we're just really good friends to this day. But really because he remembered me before all of that, and he knew that would be me again, and he didn't give up, and he reminded me that God loved me and saw who I was, and didn't see PTSD when he looked at me, and didn't see homelessness and drug addiction, but saw the real me on the inside, and that pulled a lot of walls down.
Wow, that is amazing. And so obviously you have an overcoming story, right? One of victory, and every day is still, right? I mean, every day we still, go through many challenges. A lot of times people think someone is who overcomes something devastating maybe in their life, or just a huge challenge, that's it, they're done, they're polished, and it's all over and done with. It's not. It's every day we work on things. It might not be as heavy as it once was, right, maybe, but it's still amazing that we still have to strap on our boots, so to speak, and keep it moving. So kudos to you, man. Very inspirational, inspiring story. And then the other thing is to share that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people, we have guests on here all the time for the actual first time in their life. They're sharing their story. And there's something special about that. And that's what keeps, for our guests and our listeners and our supporters, bringing them back in, because they're going to find, they know when we have a guest, they're going to find some level of inspiration in someone else's story. Yeah. And that gives us that enjoyment that here we are 6 years later still having that, providing that platform for people. Okay, so let's fast forward. So about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, you were talking about creating that nonprofit and the challenges that you overcame. So here you are coming up on, or has been 10 years. Explain the challenges of maintaining a nonprofit, right?
Absolutely.
Because in the beginning, everyone's all pumped up and super excited about it. And same thing, we can relate to that to an extent, not as long, but there was a bunch of excited people and a ton of people rallying behind us. And then after a while, you hit some weird stage where you're like, is anyone still listening? Is this thing on?
You guys still do that?
Yeah. And then somehow we just kept pushing through, and then all of a sudden it became, I think each of us have an actual love for it in our own way. Yeah. Whether some of us might just be just us gathering. That might be their drive to meet up. Some people might just be, whether it's editing or putting equipment or getting, upgrading things. Some people might just be just hosting, right? And then me is just like the interaction or getting the guest and sharing the story. What in the world? How do you maintain a decade, bro?
Yeah. So, wow, that's a packed question.
Yeah. You can unpackage it how you want and answer, and then we'll keep going with it.
I will. So when we met last time, the Way Home was kind of going through a renaissance. Yeah. We had been shut down for a while. We were getting ready to open a new home. We had Paul on with us.
That's right.
Paul, we had just hired to be our executive director. I think that rebirth of the Way Home helped. Yeah. So when we started out technically in 2011, we started formalizing this idea of what the Way Home would be. There was a lot of energy. It wasn't all positive energy. Yeah. So, we talked a little bit about this last time. Yeah. We follow a housing first model that doesn't require people to be clean, drug and alcohol free, or on mental health prescriptions to control any disorders before coming in. That was wildly unpopular in the beginning. Yeah. To this day, it's still pretty unpopular. I wouldn't call it wildly unpopular anymore. Sure. We've won over 3 or 4 people. Sure. But there's still a lot of people that are not in this camp. And, if you pair that with people that are passionate about the homeless and passionate about helping people, there's a burnout effect that comes from it. And so I started out in the beginning as the president. I built up a pretty good board and eventually stepped down from the president role to take over as the treasurer and put somebody else in as the president, who had been my vice president in the beginning, and he was my brother in arms in all of this. We went to battle together to make this happen. But I stepped away for a while to focus on my family. And in that time away, things unraveled a little bit. And I think some of that unraveling was burnout. Some of it was having not quite the right people in positions, and some of it was just bad luck. We lost some funding that caused a downward spiral and eventually caused everybody to shut down. And they had asked me to come back. That was I think that was 2020 that we were on the air here. So that summer they asked me to come back it was 2019 that we did that. 2019 they asked me to come back to help them figure out how to get another house open, because nobody had been there to open a house before. And so I came in and I agreed to come in as a part-time board member, and then eventually I became the vice president after we had met last time. And then last fall, I left my 7-year career in automotive sales to open a company of my own, working in the life insurance field. And a month after I made that move, the gentleman who was the president at the time had a major circumstance happen in his life, and he resigned and sent me a message, an email with his resignation. And all of a sudden, I was thrust back into the presidency of this thing again. And, it almost only seemed fitting as we were making this march towards 10 years that I would be back at the helm of this thing. But one of the things it did was it brought a new energy. The board that had developed out of that downtime when they'd shut down the houses that they had, it was a really good professional board that they put together. There's an attorney on the board. There's a CPA on the board. So it was a high end. There was a professor on the board who had an extensive background in contracting and on the government side. And so, just the right people. And the right people does a lot for you. You can only grow so far with the wrong people. But the sky's the limit when you got the right people. And I think you guys know a little about that, right?
Sure.
You've been 6 years you've been doing it. You got the right team here, right? And so, the same thing happened. I looked at the team that was there and I went, there was one missing piece here. There was the piece of someone who's been in the trenches in this, that knows how to kind of scrape through and make something happen. But I joined a team that was complete other than that. So when the president stepped away, it wasn't a big deal for me to step in and take over because the team was right. And I was just leading a good professional team. And so I think that has added to the energy that's there today. A couple of things happened. So Paul had to step down as the executive director. He had switched careers and he's now a general manager with U-Haul.
Oh, wow.
Nice. And he keeps getting promoted. So he might be the president of U-Haul soon. I don't know. He's moving right on up. But that meant that he had to step away from the way home. And that timing corresponded with me taking over as president again. So I had 2 jobs to do. The first one was figure out what direction we were going to go in, and the second one was to hire a new executive director. And I just happened to find a young woman who just moved to Bristol Borough. She is a current career social worker. She's worked in social work in Delaware County for, I think she's going on 8 years now. Might even be more. Juliana, I'm sorry if that's wrong. But she brought the expertise we were missing. She brought that social worker's heart and touch. And Paul had laid the groundwork and did a good job getting the right guys in the house, but she definitely took things in a different direction. And so, the short answer to how do you keep it going and how do you keep the energy is to have the right people. The wrong people had led to us having that downfall for a little while. And it wasn't that there was anything wrong with the people. They were just not the right people for that time for this organization. And like I said, bad luck on timing on some things led to it. So But yeah, people is the answer.
Now, something interesting that I believe most businesses, hopefully, that when you catch the groove, right, and everything, all the right key players are in place, you know where you're headed, you know where you are, you know where you're going, and it's the maintenance of it all, right? So explain the ability to maintain something that's good, right? Where sometimes you see there's people reinventing the wheel for no reason. It's like you have all the key players, everything's going good, and then all of a sudden they change a policy or change something how they operate, and you're like, they just ruined it. Like I'm pretty sure you just ruined it, right? And so explain where maintenance does not become complacency, though.
Yeah. So I have maybe a different outlook on a lot of that type of stuff, and I believe that a lot of companies fail because they move faster on the program side than where their current state is. And I think we talked a little bit earlier about just following the system, and that's how we get where we are, right? Usually it's not a positive thing, right?
Absolutely.
But I think that's the system in this country.
Yeah.
Is that businesses want to grow faster than they actually are, because we look at success as the company is big and thriving, where there's actually success all the way along the path if you follow the right path. And even if it's small, it's often better than moving too fast for where you're at and burning bridges and destroying things. And so I think that's, to your point, Jimmy, I think that's where some of those policy changes come in. And I've seen this in a lot of businesses. So, one of the things that I brought back to the focus for us when we got started was, look, we started as a grassroots organization. We built to 2 houses, we tore it down to nothing, and we're rebuilding to 1 house. Well, guess what we are? We're back to square one as a grassroots organization, but now with the right people. So let's not build the program too big. And, in this line of work, a lot of the temptations are, let's focus on policy to make sure that the residents are safe. Where a lot of times that can be handled by just using good judgment. And that's where it helps to have a professional social worker in place, someone whose judgment has been used and tested for a long time in very, very tough situations. So, she and I work very well together for that reason, because I've been tested in about every way you can be tested. We just talked a little about that history. But that's the big thing, I think, is not moving faster than where your current state is. And that's where I see a lot of companies fail. Especially in the nonprofit world, I see a lot of companies try to move too fast. Let's have this amazing program, and let's put all these policies in place when we're really just getting traction. And the focus needs to be on making sure that little baby of an organization grows to be an adult. Don't treat it like an adult while it's an infant, right? It still needs milk. Don't give it steak. And I see a lot of that happen. So
and almost to some extent, forgetting who you are. And I'm saying you as in a company, right? Why did we start this? Right? And sometimes we lose that. And I do believe, I agree with you, I do believe one of the key components is competition. All of a sudden, or your neighbor, whatever you're trying to keep up with, beat or maintain, all of a sudden you lose your focus. Then becomes on competition and not the grassroots reason. Right?
It's the why, right?
Yes,
it's the why. The why is so important, and I think it's the piece that's missing most of the time. Is we don't build companies from the why up. We build companies from the goal down. Right. So if the organization's goal is to be a multi-million-dollar company, we start there and work backwards, instead of why did we want to get there in the first place? What is the passion that makes us want to be a multi-million-dollar company? What are we trying to do? Who are we trying to serve? That should be the focus, and that's kind of what I've brought back to the table here. Not that we didn't have it, but it's the thing now. It was a thing before, it's the thing now. So,
And shout out to all the social workers, clinical social services.
It's not easy.
For nothing.
Yeah.
That takes a special person, a special talent, and we definitely here at Rotated Views Podcast appreciate you, appreciate all you do. With that being said, define what compassion means to you.
yeah, that's, compassion is really important to me personally just because of what I've been through.
Yeah.
And I think everybody has a little different view on what compassion is. I believe compassion has a couple of components. The first one is the golden rule. Treating people how you want to be treated. I think that's a big root in what compassion really is. Because compassion to me is not looking at yourself as greater than anyone else, but having empathy for everyone in every situation. And that's a hard thing to do. If you look at compassion, that's a pretty extreme definition of compassion, because that means I need to look at somebody who, by all standards, should be my enemy and have empathy for them. And we live in a dark world in a lot of ways, and there are a lot of uglinesses out there. There's a lot of dark crime out there. And to me, compassion means that I need to be able to look at that individual who's guilty of those things and have some form of empathy for him and not to hate. I think it's easy to have compassion on someone who's a good story, right?
Yeah.
We all like that.
Yeah.
But to be able to have compassion on someone who, by all reasons should be your enemy is hard. And, I think that's why that's referred to by all the great philosophers and, the teachings of Jesus. And, we've talked, I think the last time we brought up even Gandhi. And that's a big piece of that is being able to look at your enemy with grace in your heart. I think that's...
Yeah, that is some heavy stuff. And you're right. It's a very interesting point. It's so much easier. Not that it's easy per se, but it's easier to have compassion for someone who is in favor in your mind to your liking, right? Like, this is what a good person is. This is what they look like. I can be compassionate to him or her. I can see that they're trying. And then what happens, the complete reverse of that. And it's almost interesting to challenge yourself in that way. Do I have that same thought process or compassion? And
it certainly is.
For the actual golden rule itself, can I truly treat someone I don't even know the way I treat myself, who that's all the person I know the most?
Yeah. And I don't give that definition and say I do this perfectly, right?
Right.
And I think that's why I like that definition, because I will never achieve it. And I love that. I love not just the challenge of that, but what that means in life in general, right? That means that my kids are going to watch me striving for that.
Yes.
And so what are they going to be like? And what are their friends going to be like, right? So that's how you start the next generation on the right foot.
Yes.
That's amazing to me. I know, we've talked about your father in the past and the impact that he's had, because he was that example for you guys, right?
That's right.
Oh, yeah.
And,
absolutely.
I think, you guys are here doing what you do because of that example. And we all want to do that for our kids, right?
Yeah.
To do it even better than our fathers did.
Yeah.
And, I love looking at things that way.
Yeah.
And it's a struggle. It's a big struggle.
Yeah.
But it's an important aspect to look at when you're dealing with the population we're dealing with. Mm-hmm. We're dealing with guys, a lot of times came off the street or came out of the woods. It's not as extreme anymore as it was back then. There are fewer homeless camps in the area, but more people couch surfing and just, trying to find a place to crash for the night. But they all come with baggage, and they all come with, you call it their own dirty laundry, right? Whatever that is. Some of them come with alcoholism, not because they just fell into it, but because they were drinking to stay warm when they were in the woods. We dealt with that a lot in the past.
Wow.
it's almost the antifreeze piece to it. But that leads to addiction. And, a lot of guys that, got hurt and couldn't work anymore. And so they bring a lot of, dark things there, whether that's depression, or if that's just that they quit on themselves. They lost their self-concept, their identity. If I can look at those people with that definition of compassion, that's an impact that is going to last. And it's not just going to impact that person, but everyone in their circle.
Yeah.
That's how I challenge myself in that way.
It's amazing because the next question is taking that to being a landlord, being a compassionate landlord, which earlier you stated that this concept of the way home wasn't necessarily the most popular, right?
Yeah.
And the approach. What is the maintenance with that, right? So how do you maintain the integrity of what you want to do, but then also not to keep everyone else happy at the same time, but it's almost like you're putting out all these little baby fires to maintain, to keep this thing afloat.
Absolutely. We have, I think we have 7 gentlemen in the house that we run now.
Wow.
So you have 7 unique personalities in one residence, and you have to make sure that you are treating them all with respect and at the same time maintaining order. I put a lot of credit on our executive director. She has been fantastic at making sure that she's giving the support that they need and not being overbearing and not giving support that they don't ask for. But I'm going to go back to what we had talked about back in, I think it was 2019. The whole concept behind Housing First is if you bring somebody in who is homeless and you don't give them any rules as far as addiction or mental health, and you just say, come in, your only responsibility is pay your rent on time and be a good roommate.
Yeah.
That's it. And leave it at that. One of the things that happens is their self-concept changes because all of a sudden they're accepted for who they are, and most of the time have not been in a very long time. And someone whose self-concept now reflects a view that I'm worthy wants to change their current state, wants to change their circumstances.
Wow.
That's the key to maintaining order, if you will, in the house, is to make sure that your focus is actually on acceptance and improving self-concept, and not so much on developing a program that you want to change lives. Because the one thing I have learned in ministry and in the nonprofit world is that program will never change a life, but self-concept will. Showing someone that they're worthy will change their life every time. But no program you can put together will have that kind of an impact on anybody's life.
Outside of, can you share maybe a follow-up story to maybe someone that was utilized the way home in the past and are doing 10 times better?
Yeah. So, back in 2012, we brought the original group in. We brought 5 guys out of the homeless camp into housing. We had some tragedies in there. One of those gentlemen unfortunately passed away. But we had one story that I absolutely love. There's one gentleman out of the original 5. He was the first one to graduate out of the program.
Yeah.
He went on to rent a place in town, and I've run into him a few times. He actually lives around the corner from me now. He's got an apartment that overlooks the Delaware River.
Nice.
And he has been out on his own now for, I guess, about 9 years.
Wow.
And doing really well. Still local. People know him. People love him. And that's, one of the best stories that we've had.
Yeah.
I am still proud to say that our success rate is extremely high. We are over 80% on people who leave the program who maintain housing 12 months after they've left. That's an incredible number. We don't follow up beyond that. And I'm sure if we did, we'd find that the number was still quite high.
Yeah.
But the reason why it's high is because our goal is not to develop a program to impact lives, but impact lives by changing self-concept.
I love that. So switching gears a little bit.
Yeah.
How do you find the houses themselves and the rental properties, and just on a very high level, how does it all work actually?
So that's changed a little bit over time. We are renters, so we rent from a landlord who's willing to rent to us and let us sublet to the population we serve. As you can imagine, that's not the easiest thing to find. One of the focus changes that our previous president brought, that I have maintained, because I think he was spot on with it, is we want to find landlords who want to partner with us. We want to find people not just who are willing to do this, but who believe in what we're doing. So the landlord we have now has been phenomenal. And he, at one point, had opened the door to us and said, hey, when you guys are ready for the next house, let me know, because I'm developing properties and I'll find you another place.
Wow.
Locally. And cool. We love that. And so if you're listening, we're going to be ready soon.
Nice.
But that's the focus that our previous president brought, is that we don't just want people willing to rent to us. We want people who believe in what we're doing, who see this as something good.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important, because when I said people are what makes the difference, it's not just people on your staff, it's community in general. And I think, community is one of the most powerful things that there is. But when you can pull community into something like this, it just has such a greater impact.
Yeah.
And that's what we're looking for. We're looking to impact.
So when you first started, I don't know if you want to explain very superficially or wherever you were, family-wise, you being a family man.
Yeah.
Explain a little bit about how that you integrate maybe some of, even if, not saying you bring the kids along, but just integrate some of the compassion components into your everyday life with your squad, tribe, so to speak.
Yeah, no, that's crucial. And, I would say, we talked about this last time too. I think, my tribe is my church group, my congregation there. And, they have been a supporter of us from day one.
Wow.
So, 10-year relationship there that they've been donating to the Way Home. That's crucial. The Way Home is actually even listed on our website, the church's website, as a ministry that the church participates in. It's that strong. And so, that brings my family into it, not just my nucleus family, but my extended family. When we first started back in 2012, it was just my wife and I at home at that point. My daughter wasn't born until October 2013. So we were about a year in to the Way Home, a little more than that, when she came along.
Wow.
She was probably 4 when I stepped away. And I stepped away for about a year and a half to focus on family because my son was born.
Yeah.
And in that time, I still talked about the Way Home, but they didn't really remember much.
Yeah.
And when I came back, the timeline accelerated quickly. I mean, I talked about that before. I agreed to come in to consult, which led to me being a board member, which led to me being the vice president, which now led to me taking over again.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm playing catch up now with my kids.
Yeah.
So, because I do so many different things. I coach Little League. I'm an elder at the church, and so I'm always going to meetings. And now I work from home in the insurance business, and so I have meetings with families. And so my daughter kind of understands that I'm in meetings, but never really quite gets which one I'm in.
Yeah.
But every now and then I get to stop and talk to her about why it is that I do these things that I do.
Nice.
And I think each one of them, even though it's very different from each other, has the same root, and that is a root of service. And just like you guys, that is something that my father laid on my heart. My dad was a servant. He helped everybody. He was the guy that, if you got a flat tire and you didn't know how to change it, you called him. And what did he do? He brought me with him when we went to go change tires. And so, when I became an adult, I said, I'm going to do that too, because I remember watching him do that and never questioning whether it was his turn, because it just was. somebody needed help, he went and did it. And so I do the same. I give back. And I make it a point for my kids to know what I'm doing, even if they're not there. They know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Last weekend is a great example. There's a church back in New York, where I'm from originally, that has been sponsoring us now for a couple of years. And so they gave a big donation to us at the beginning of the year. And then they wanted to give back even more. So they wanted to come down and spend an afternoon with the guys in the house. So they planned to come down, and they asked, what do they need? And so they got bedding together for the guys, new blankets and sheets. A lot of them hadn't gotten new blankets in over a year. And they brought it all down. They came down, had a pizza party with the guys, and got to sit there and talk.
Wow.
And before we left, I told my kids exactly what I was going to do. I'm going down to the house that this organization Daddy runs, and we're going to meet with these guys in the house and just talk to them about life. And you get the questions then of, well, why are there guys in this house? What is this for?
Yeah.
And they know what homelessness is.
Yeah.
They know, a bit about my story. And so, I get to share. These are guys that were experiencing homelessness until they found the way home. And that's why Daddy does what he does. Because we're helping change lives. These are guys that didn't have a place to live before, and now they do. Well, that's really neat, Dad.
Yeah, that's cool.
It certainly is. And so, I hope when they get older that they want to be involved a little bit more and they want to be able to do stuff. But, they're young right now. My daughter's 8. My son just turned 6. My little guy's about to be 2. So they're not in that group yet.
Of course, sure.
But, I look forward and I say, well, a few years from now, yeah, they could come out and be a part of a weekend event. And we do some things. Like last year, the guys in the house hosted the church for pumpkin painting. And all the kids came
That's awesome.
to the house.
Yeah.
And they painted pumpkins in the backyard. So the kids, they didn't really know, well, that's the organization Daddy runs. They just went.
Yeah.
And it's really neat to be able to keep your whole tribe, not just the big kids, but the little kids too, as part of that supporters and seeing who they are. And when you get to do things like that, you look at men in their circumstances differently than you do if you're on the outside looking in. From the outside looking in, they're guys that were down on their luck, and the way home came along to give them an opportunity. But when you actually go and hang out like that, they just are men. There's no outlying definition behind them. They're just men.
Yeah.
And they just reside there. And I think that's so important for everybody to be able to see. So that's why I like the idea that the tribe isn't just my nucleus family and my kids, but it's everybody that I'm connected to from the inside out.
I love it. So you gave a ton of phenomenal examples. And this was one that I already had ready, queued up, in the hopper, ready to rock and roll. And then you just said a bunch of inspiring stuff. But what has been one of, maybe one you have not listed thus far, memorable moments in the last decade?
Yeah.
And memorable meaning it does not have to necessarily be a good thing.
Yeah.
Just memorable in the fact that it's like, hey man, we'll never do that again.
I think back to the beginning, our first year, we were brand new to this, and we didn't do a very good job of screening our residents. In fact, in the beginning, we just really wanted 5 warm bodies who were willing to come in and rent a room.
Yeah, sure.
But we put together a group of 5 guys that had no business being in a house together.
Right.
I mean, the hostilities were terrible.
You can only imagine.
Oh yeah. And we had an assault in the house. We had assaults outside of the house, but not looking at personalities. We had a broken hip at one point. We had some lacerations. We had all kinds of just messiness.
Yeah.
We had rumors of drug dealing going on from inside the house. We had fights with neighbors. But it was all because we were so excited about opening and getting guys in that we didn't really slow down enough to make sure that the guys coming in really wanted to be a part of what this was.
Right.
And they didn't. They were guys that had been in the woods and just didn't want to be in the woods anymore. So out of that first group, we had one guy that moved on, We had one guy pass away. We had another guy that moved into housing about 2 years later, who I believe is still in housing. And then we had 2 guys that went back on the street, and to the best of my knowledge, stayed there.
Yeah.
Now, I sincerely hope that they're not there today, but the last I knew they were. So yeah, I mean, the growing pains in that time were just learning how to slow down on the search and make sure you were putting the right people together.
Wow.
Which is a hard thing to say, and it sounds a little bit like it's contradictory to, we don't have any rules about bringing people in. You know, you can be an addict and come in. You can have some mental health issues and come in. It doesn't mean that everybody is a good fit for the program, and it doesn't mean that everybody is a good fit for the house. So we have learned to draw those lines.
Yeah.
The other thing that we've learned is when you voice that properly, people filter themselves out. They will, get back to us and say, well, this isn't really what I'm looking for. And it's hard. A shared housing environment is hard.
Yeah.
They're going to have a roommate in their room.
Yeah.
Or 2. Some of the rooms are big enough that there's 3 people in them.
Yeah.
We try to keep it to 2 people in a room, though. So you're going to have a roommate, and you're going to have 6 or 7 people that live in this house with you.
Yeah.
So it's a hard thing to kind of balance. And the other housing first organizations actually do single room occupancy. They find 1-bedroom apartments and put individuals in 1 bedroom.
Gotcha.
The cost on that is a lot cheaper than the alternative to them being, at the exposure of the elements and emergency services picking up the bill for them. But the way we do things is a fraction of even that plan. And it's just not right for everybody.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that would be the biggest one. And I'll give you another one that's also not a positive, memorable experience. But this is one that I learned personally. I learned that there's going to be conflict, and I have to be okay with that. Because we had conflict with several board members at one point early on. And I let it go too far internally. I didn't voice a lot. I kept a lot in. And at one point in the first couple of years that we were doing this, I got really bad chest pains, and I wound up in the hospital thinking I had a heart attack. And it was just stress, and it was because I was keeping everything inside. And so I had to learn that conflict is not only going to be present, but necessary. Because, conflict is that iron that sharpens its fellow iron. You don't get strong without that.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand that at the time, early on in this. But 8 years later, I get it. And, conflict seems to find me regardless. And it's okay now. I don't look at conflict today and say, oh, I don't want to deal with this. It's actually, okay, let's get past this because I know something better is on the other side.
Yeah.
Right.
The approach is different. Let's work on it rather than just
internalize it.
Yeah.
Burn up.
Yeah.
Amazing. How do you maintain clients, or what has been your experience during the pandemic? Did the pandemic switch anything up?
It did. Yeah, that's funny. That was something I wanted to make sure we talked about here today, because I think the pandemic affected everybody in some way.
Yeah.
I don't think there was anybody in this country that wasn't in somewhat affected by it. But the big thing that changed for us is social work in general is a community aspect. Is community at work together. One of the things that we did really well here in Southeast Pennsylvania is that we had a monthly meeting where all the social work agencies got together to talk about what the updates were in their organizations, and all of us who did housing were able to share, hey, we've got X number of beds open. COVID shut that down. In the very beginning, it was run by the Ben Salem School District at one point, and it got shut down. The schools were shut down. The organizations all went remote. Most social workers weren't coming back to the office at all, and you couldn't meet in a group. And Zoom wasn't what it is today, and so it was shut down for about a year, and then when it came back online, it was done by Zoom or Microsoft Meet or whatever that
Teams,
is.
whatever.
Teams, yeah. They were doing those types of meetings, but you don't get the same impact when you're not in a room together.
Yeah.
So what that resulted in is having a very hard time finding new residents, because what we relied on is being there to do an update every month, and then all the social work agencies that are looking for housing for men went, oh yeah, that's right, James was just here and he said the Way Home has 2 open beds, let's get a hold of him. And they would call in and we would get a list. And so the goal was always, if we had 7 beds in the house, to have at least 7 names on our waiting list. So if anybody left the house, there'd be somebody to plug in. Mm-hmm. And I would say for the last year and a half, we've never had more than 1 or 2 names on the list.
Yeah.
And most of the time, they're gone before there's an opening.
Yeah.
And then you're struggling to find people. So we're at full staff right now, or full we're full beds right now. But if somebody leaves, it's going to be a challenge to find somebody else. Now, the world is changing again. We're kind of coming back to the new normal, and those meetings are going to start being in person again. And I look forward to that, because we'll be able to function in community again, all the social work agencies, because they're so interdependent. But when you take us away from each other, that we lose a little something, and I'm sure every single one of them did. But yeah, that's been a big change over the last 2 years that we've been doing this now in the pandemic.
So I had a conversation. I was having a conversation with someone saying, we're progressing into a better version of our meetings. It's still not the same, but at least. So now we're doing partials, right?
Yeah.
And now some of the meetings are virtual and some of them are in person. If the space permitting, whatever.
Yeah.
And it's you quickly notice how powerful in-person meetings are, and so and then we also got into a very, very bad habit, multiple bad habits. One being, while you're on a Zoom call, answer all the emails you can, have another monitor going with still doing your work.
Yeah.
Awful habit.
Yep.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Second thing is we booked meetings from 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5, 5 to 6, and it just keeps going like that. That is literally impossible if you're meeting in person, right? Because you need travel time, you need a bio break. It's just not reality.
Right.
It's just like you can't do that.
Yeah.
And we got in these weird habits of just kind of disruptive. The final thing, which is fantastic, and you appreciate more once all of a sudden you have these in person, is those little interpersonal conversations, the little microscopic ones that happen before, after, in the middle of a break or something with your colleagues around you.
They're gone.
And it's like, oh my gosh. So if I had to solve a problem, I knew X, Y, and Z would be at a particular meeting, and I would walk with them back to my office, right?
Yep.
And that was just bang, I could resolve it.
Right.
You get on these Zoom calls, it's like, well, I can't. I'm on like 500 Zoom calls. I don't have time to talk to you, And it's like all of a sudden now we're too busy to.
Right.
It's like, wait, I thought we were supposed to be saving time by doing this. Now all of a sudden everyone's, you look at someone's calendar, it's booked from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. You're like, I don't even know what to do with this.
Trying to get a hold of them, so we have teams, and when we try to get a hold of the supervisor or something, their dot is always red.
Yeah.
And it's like you click on it, it's in a meeting, or they're on a call, and it's like they want us to reach out to them, but how are we supposed to reach out to them? And then it's kind of like
it becomes
backwards,
more counterproductive than anything.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, no, I think if it's done well, it's a positive, and if it's not done well, it's a huge negative. So, I'd mentioned to you guys before the show here that I came out of the car business and I moved into the insurance business, and so I'm in life insurance now, and the agencies that I work for are huge. There are people all over the country. Well, Zoom has allowed us to meet every day. And so in the mornings, we have a game planning meeting for all of the agents in the agency. And I'm meeting with guys that are in Pittsburgh and Texas and California and, all over the place. We never were able to do that before Zoom came along.
Absolutely.
So, those are positives.
Of course.
But we purposely don't overbook meetings for that reason. Now, I meet with all my clients on Zoom, and so Zoom fatigue is certainly a real thing.
Absolutely.
I think we're all going to come out of here with blue light issues and, and all kinds of stuff, right? That's going to be our normal glasses. Now we're going to have a blue light filter in them by default anymore because we live on computers anymore. But, I think that there are some positives. Now, on our side of things, on the Way Home side, one of the things that it allowed for us is our treasurer actually moved back home to Wisconsin.
Wow.
Well, he's still at our board meetings.
Right.
Because they're on Zoom.
Yeah.
Right. We've got another gentleman on our board who's he's an attorney that works for the U.S. government, works for the military. He's in, they've done a lot of court appearances by Zoom now. So he's in Zoom meetings all the time. Yeah. But he's not going to be back to Bristol to come to a board meeting. But Zoom allows them to do that. So, there are some positives to it, but Absolutely. I think it's all in the scheduling of it. Excessive Zoom scheduling is the worst thing around, but it is a huge opportunity outside of that. It's an opportunity for community and connection that we didn't have before.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. There's obviously the benefit, and it's interesting too because we kind of said the same thing on an interesting front with social media, right? Social media gave folks the ability, and still does, to I'll speak for myself, keeping in contact with friends and family that I would have never known what was going on in the past 5-10 years. Being that I've physically never met up with this person,
right.
But I have some level of insight by seeing, the pictures and the stories that they're sharing, me commenting, and there's still some level of interaction. I think that's a beautiful thing.
Absolutely.
Again, like everything else, when done right, Yep. And then you can utilize that. And so all these things can, I do appreciate the turning things into the tool. And utilizing that tool for its benefit. But it's just something about human. It's just something about us. We got to take things to another level and somehow ruin it. Yep. But
push to the limit.
Yeah, and it's good though because then you know what's good, what's not good.
Right. Yeah. Right.
And that we talk a lot about that when it comes to achieving or going after your goals in life. Like, how do you even know what you're capable of if you never really truly exhausted yourself?
Yep.
Right? And so now we know booking Zoom meetings back to back to back. Okay, maybe we've just got a little too Zoom happy.
Right. Yeah.
And whatever. And if we can laugh at ourselves, I think that's the most beneficial approach.
Absolutely.
To all of this. Instead of being so angry and hateful and just full of, doom and gloom.
Yeah.
You have to have the ability, and obviously when appropriate, but in most circumstances you have to laugh at yourself.
Yeah.
So where do you think the future of the Way Home is? And what's it look like to you in your mind? A little bit of dream building, as we were talking earlier about business locations for various items. Like when you think of 5-10 years from now, another decade from now, you're like, wow, look at this past 10 years. Look how far we've come. What's the next 10 look like?
Yeah, so we just had a board meeting last month where we talked a little bit about this vision for 2022. And we definitely see us moving back into the building side of things, moving back into growing from the inside out. So, we do look forward to opening a second house this year once we get some more applicants in and we can actually build that list back up. One of the things that we actually have talked about is figuring out a way to move me into a more executive role with the organization. So not just serving as the president of the board, but realizing a vision that we had in the very beginning. When we first started this, the goal was not just for me to be the president of the board, but be president and CEO, so that I could be the face of the organization and out there connecting with social work agencies. That had never been able to happen because the fundraising just never took off. And when it did take off, I was already in another career field, and my goal was to find the first executive director. And now that I think about it, I've hired all 3 executive directors we've had. The first one back then, and then Paul, and then our new director, Juliana. So I definitely see the future being one where I will be in an executive role with the organization, which will push the vision piece beyond just what we do on a monthly basis in a board meeting to outside of the virtual walls of Zoom and out into the community. I also see us not just focusing locally, but building connections outside of the greater Philadelphia area. I mentioned earlier that we have a church in New York that is sponsoring us, and so I see the opportunity to move outside of the state borders and partner with some folks in other states to do some of this. And I think, that's not a 2022 vision, but that's certainly in the next decade that I see that happening.
Yeah.
But, we've got enough work to do right here in our own backyard. Homelessness took a big upswing during COVID. Of course, so did support take a big upswing. Government support really picked up. But there are certainly more people homeless now than there were pre-COVID. So there's need, and we need to fill that need locally before we move beyond our local borders. But I see the Way Home as being an organization without borders. I see this being something that maybe doesn't actively work in other states, but supports other organizations that build in other states, where we can say, look, we did this on a small scale, on a low budget, you can do this where you're at. In the same way that the tiny home communities have really taken off across the country.
Right.
You saw that start out on the West Coast and start moving across the country. And, some of the counties, even here in Pennsylvania, have really gotten serious about veteran homelessness. And in a lot of places, they've eradicated veteran homelessness. But I don't see why we can't do that with all homelessness.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so, that's a bigger vision down the road, and I think the Way Home is going to have a part in that. And when I was really young and we started this 10 years ago, my vision was that the Way Home was going to be in social work textbooks when we got done.
Wow.
That may or may not still happen. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I don't see that as the necessary vision anymore.
Sure.
What's the root behind that is, can we inspire other organizations to pick up the mantle and do this in other places?
Sure.
And I think we can, and I think we will.
I love it. So we have listeners from all across the globe, some of which may want to start their very own nonprofit. What is your recommendation or advice before they get started, or maybe they just got started? What is a piece of advice you can share with them that would point them in the right direction?
Yeah, so, we've talked about some of this already. Make sure that you've got the right team. Make sure you've got the right people. But really make sure you know why you're doing what you're doing. And make that the focus. Write it down. Put it in your slogan, whatever you need to do to not forget what that is. Because when you fast forward 10 years, if that's not still in the focus, then your organization isn't where it has the potential to be. So if you can start out with the why right at the helm of what you're doing and keep it there, you'll be successful. The rest will fall into place.
I love it. So James, 2 final questions. Is there anything, any topic you wanted to discuss that we did not hit upon during our discussion? And 2, if folks wanted to reach out to you directly, what's the best way to connect with you?
Sure. Yeah, so, we hit on a lot of stuff here. The one thing that I want to throw out a positive.
Yeah.
So the Way Home, 10 years.
Yes.
10 years, right?
That's
it's a big
awesome.
deal.
Yeah, that's a really big deal.
And
Shout out to you
we
guys.
intend to celebrate the heck out of 10 years.
love
So June 10th, there will be a gala, a 10th anniversary gala for the Way Home. There will be digital invitations that'll be available. So if anybody wants to come support us, reach out to me. I'll get invitations out to you guys so you can share
please
that
do.
as you will.
Sure.
We're hosting it over at Georgine's. So I think we can have 240 people at the event, and I want to book the house.
Nice.
I want to fill it up. We're going to have entertainment there. We're working on getting a band in there for some dance floor stuff, but we're going to have some
Nice.
silent auction, great dinner, some speeches from some of the board members. So it's going to be a positive. So big deal there. If you want to get a hold of me, easiest way to reach me is my email from The Way Home, which is jrichardson.twh@gmail.com. You can find us online. Our website is twhousing.org. You'll see a little snippet in there on each of the board members and a little bit of our mission. There is a PayPal link on the page if you want to donate to The Way Home. But we are just so thrilled to be able to have put 10 years into this organization, to have made an impact in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and Bristol Borough in the greater Philadelphia area. We've impacted a lot of lives inside the house and outside the house, outside of the state borders. We have followers from all around the country that know what we're doing and really support us and love us, and really happy to be able to be back here with you guys and share a little bit more about where we've been, where we're going. But yeah, we've got some celebrating to do this year, and we intend to do it well. So that's what I want to share with you guys. It's a good year. It's going to be even better. We're gonna have a good time in June, but we're having a good time reflecting on the fact that we've made an impact for 10 stinking years.
Yeah, man.
A lot of people.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Congrats.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is fantastic. I love it. Well, James, as usual, man, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. Congrats again.
Thank you.
And yeah, get those invites out, and for sure, we will definitely support.
Absolutely.
So we like to wrap things up with quotes, and the first one is by the Dalai Lama. Compassion and tolerance are not a sign of weakness, but a sign of strength. And the second one by Steve Maraboli. A kind gesture can reach a wound that only compassion can heal. The Way Home Part 2. In this episode, we have special guest James Richardson. We cover topics that range from running a nonprofit, rental properties, compassion, homelessness, and much more. We wrap the episode up with quotes from the Dalai Lama and Steve Maraboli. Awesome. Guys, thanks again for joining us. The Rotated Views podcast was produced for self-development purposes. Huge shout out to our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by the Blessed Lifestyle brand. That is BL3SSED.com. Also sponsored by The Motivation Files Unleashed. This motivational mixtape will be your fuel for success. Available on all platforms. Guys, don't forget to visit the website, JimmyleeVelez.com. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Rotated Views. If you have any inquiries or questions, email us at info@JimmyleeVelez.com. On behalf of myself and the rest of the crew, we wish you massive success. Stay blessed.